Hello again, and welcome to AI Accountability, how tech is building consumer trust. My name is Jason Oxman, and I am the president and CEO of ITI. ITI is the leading global trade association of the technology industry, and our member companies that we represent are invested in every facet of the AI ecosystem. ITI's members are designing and manufacturing the chips that power AI systems. They're building and maintaining the AI infrastructure at data centers and in the cloud. They're developing large language models that consumers are using every day, and the B2B applications that help businesses of all sizes harness the power and efficiencies of artificial intelligence. The excitement and accelerating adoption of AI has also obviously caught the attention of governments across the globe who are grappling with how to ensure the responsible deployment of this innovative technology. There's a flurry of policymaking and regulatory activity taking place around the world, including the EU AI Act that officially goes into effect later this week. Ongoing multilateral efforts at the G7 and the OECD focused on advanced AI systems. The creation of an international network of AI safety institutes, Brazil's efforts to advance AI regulation, and of course, in the US, continued interest on Capitol Hill. In fact, tomorrow, the Senate Commerce Committee is poised to advance a slew of significant AI-related legislation, including, importantly, a bill to authorize the NIST AI Safety Institute, who we'll hear from later during this event. Just last Friday, NIST released new guidance for generative AI developers on managing the misuse risk of dual-use foundation models, along with final versions of other documents tasked by the AI executive order. This is a big achievement for NIST and hopeful signs for what can still be accomplished in the US this year. Of course, just this morning, we heard from NTIA, also in the Department of Commerce, with their initial read on the need for regulation. And we were pleased to see NTIA took a very positive approach, a wait-and-see approach that monitors but does not regulate first and ask questions later. This wave of policymaking activity is one of the reasons ITI developed our AI Accountability Framework, which is a first of its kind consensus set of best practices that organizations across the AI ecosystem believe are important in order to advance the responsible development and deployment of AI, including practices that are specific to frontier AI models. Now, the practices included in this framework are meant to complement other existing frameworks, as well as initiatives and best practices, including the G7 International Code of Conduct and Voluntary Commitments. One of the key themes in the global conversation has been AI safety, specifically how to manage risks associated with highly capable AI models, especially given that many risks are evolving and there's not a clear understanding of what exactly those risks might be. ITI supports efforts to advance AI safety, including developing specific practices for testing and evaluation of models. That's one of the reasons we joined the AI Safety Institute Consortium, to provide perspectives on various activities that the Safety Institute hopes to advance. Now, this is a pivotal moment for AI policymaking, and ITI is eager to continue our important work, driving consensus across the industry and partnering with policymakers in markets around the globe. There's global attention, for example, on how the upcoming US election will affect all areas of policy, and that includes US leadership on AI. While both presumptive US presidential candidates have different policy approaches, it is very important that we continue US leadership. Whoever's in the White House next year, the next administration should leverage smart policies to continue American leadership in AI development. For American companies to continue to grow and lead domestically and around the world, US policymakers need to help set the global norms for AI. We continue to urge policymakers, regardless of political affiliation, to prioritize policies that support the beneficial use of AI, that build trust in the technology, and that maintain consumers' freedom to access content and platforms that use artificial intelligence. We have a terrific program in store for you, and I'm excited to introduce my colleague, Vice President of Policy, Courtney Lang, a recognized expert in AI, ITI's lead on all of this important work, and she promises to kick off our robust discussion today with a very interesting guest and a very interesting topic. So with that, I'll hand the mic over to Courtney. Courtney, over to you.
Hi, Jason. Hi, everybody online. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you to those of you that are joining us today online. I am really happy to be joined today by Conrad Stosz, who joined as the head of policy at the US AI Safety Institute a few months ago. Conrad was previously with the White House, where he was the director of AI in the office of the federal CIO, where he was working to advance policy focused on federal agency use of AI. So Conrad, we're really happy to have you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and with the folks on the line about the really important work that the AI Safety Institute is doing. As Jason mentioned earlier, late last week, NIST, including the AI Safety Institute, put out a series of documents, including one focused on managing the misuse risks of dual-use foundation models pursuant to the AI executive order. And so to start, I was really hoping that you could touch a little bit on the guidance that AC put out and what you're hoping to achieve with that. And then building upon that, some of the other documents that NIST put out also seem to be things that the AC would necessarily have a vested interest in potentially building upon, especially as you all are focused on advancing research in AI safety and evaluation of some of these frontier advanced AI models. So would be interested to hear your perspectives on both the document that you released last week and what you're hoping that will do to move the needle on trustworthy AI development and deployment, and then how you're intending to build upon some of the other work that we're seeing out of NIST in the context of some of these advanced AI models.
Great. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Jason, and thank you all for being here today. Happy to be speaking about the AI Safety Institute. So to answer your question, Courtney, I think there is sort of a past, present, and future here in terms of AI, and there's been so much going on. Jason helpfully shed light on some of the past. We've had a large number of documents come out in the past few months, particularly on Friday from NIST and from the Department of Commerce more broadly, executing on the executive order's broad tasking to go out, collect information, develop reports, develop guidelines on AI. I won't go through all of them, but some of those that are most relevant to the Safety Institute include the report that was put out back in April on synthetic content, sort of survey approach, of which there will be a final document coming out before too long, and then the guidance on misuse of dual-use foundation models that you mentioned, Courtney. And so let me talk a little bit about that document, and then a little bit about what's sort of coming, how that will be built upon going forward. So that document focuses on providing a series of best practices and voluntary guidelines for how AI developers, focused in particular on sort of the initial developer of a foundation model, can manage the risk that those models might be misused to cause harm. And that includes misuse defined relatively broadly, of course, focusing on deliberate misuse, not accidental misuse or sort of a mismatch to the application, but it includes things like some of the more speculative and emerging national security risks, like the potential for a foundation model to enable the development of a biological weapon or to enable offensive cyber operations, but also current harms. So things like a model being misused to develop or to generate child sexual abuse material or non-consensual intimate imagery, also known as deepfake pornography, for example. So the document outlines 7 core objectives, broad outcome-oriented language focused on what are some of the intermediary outcomes that lead to these risks being more effectively managed for an AI developer. And each of these objectives is then supported by a set of best practices, which are optional controls, to use the vernacular of a standard, that could be used to achieve these objectives. Certainly not intended to be exhaustive, and recognizing that these definitely continue to evolve as time goes on. And even if you wrote this document 6 months ago, the contents would likely look different. But trying to encapsulate some of the best practices that we're seeing in industry, as well as some of those that are not yet widespread, but that we're seeing significant promise from, as well as a range of sort of transparency examples, ways in which organizations can help to provide documentation in various fora, potentially if and when it became relevant in a regulatory context, but also just for public transparency or even transparency internally about how risks are being managed. So that's sort of this document. It's out for public comment, so very much welcome comments from the group as a whole, but also the individual members. And those comments are due on September 9th, and we're expecting to, of course, make improvements to the document, given how forward-leaning this subject is and how consensus is. I think it would be wrong to say that there's a consensus on how to address these risks. There's definitely a lot of room anticipated for further improvements, and look forward to those comments. To answer the other aspect of your question, Courtney, sort of looking forward, what goes beyond this? We released this document, kind of an initial piece of guidance coming specifically from the Safety Institute and building off of past work of NIST. We have a couple things that we're looking forward to. One is the executive order is not done, and we have more tasks to carry out, and that includes more guidance or guidelines around synthetic content and content authentication that is required towards the end of this year. The way that the executive order is written, that also sets up specifically work for the federal government to, through potential OMB guidance, require federal agencies to authenticate content that they produce, or particular sensitive content that they produce. For instance, a video of the president giving a speech, or an audio recording of the Secretary of Defense, for example, that could be particularly sensitive if faked, and to provide, when the government releases it, sort of a verifiable, technologically verifiable means of authenticating that the content is real and is not generated by AI, or that can be, at least if it's been edited, can be traced to, here's the way that we routinely edit these images, right, for size, for color, things along those lines. So that's something that the Safety Institute is continuing to work on in collaboration with the rest of NIST. And we're also starting to work directly with companies, as we've set out in our vision document, to evaluate models for risks. There's a focus on misuse risk, although that's not the entire extent of it, but focusing on doing pre-deployment and post-deployment evaluations of frontier models, working directly with companies at the beginning of that process. We're continuing to build that out over time, to build up the technical capacity and the relationships that we have to do that, to have an open and frank sort of research exchange with companies on a voluntary basis to help inform both our guidance, but also the development of these models. I think the last thing that I'll raise before turning it back over to you, Courtney, is the general work that we're doing to build our technical capacity through hiring and through building relationships throughout the U.S. government and with industry to do even more work along these lines, and to more broadly advance sort of the science of AI evaluation and of advancing AI safety, expanding into particular areas like cybersecurity evaluations, biosecurity evaluations, and more. So we're really excited about just the pace of development and change. The Safety Institute has only existed since March in a real way in terms of actual personnel, butts and seats. So we're very excited to see that scaling up happening very quickly. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for the comprehensive overview of some of the various activities that the Safety Institute is working on, as well as a kind of deeper dive into the managing misuse risk document that you all published. I know that ITI will be looking forward to providing feedback. And as you noted, this is kind of a first opportunity for folks to, I think, provide their perspectives on some of this. There were two things that you said that I wanted to follow up on. The first of which is related to your engagement with stakeholders and with industry. As I'm sure some on the line are aware, there is a consortium that is affiliated with the AI Safety Institute, which you all are thinking through how to best leverage. And so I wanted to see if you could provide some more thoughts, right, on this kind of very vast AI ecosystem. I think when I last checked, the consortium was up to about 280 organizations from across the AI ecosystem, right? So including civil society, industry, et cetera. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what steps the AI Safety Institute is taking to leverage the consortium. I know initially it was stood up and there was a couple of different work streams focused on helping to advance some of the deliverables under the executive order, but wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you all are working not only to kind of coordinate across all of these kind of various stakeholder groups, but how you all are thinking about leveraging the consortium more specifically moving forward, especially given, it sounds like you all are still figuring out exactly what efforts you'll be prioritizing moving forward. So if you could share a little bit more about how you're thinking through your kind of interaction with the consortium in particular, I think that would be very interesting for folks on the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been engaging a ton with the consortium, including to understand how to make it most useful, and to extend the efforts that have gone on so far to make efficient and effective use of the consortium members' time. And we know that our work within the Institute itself is only one part of the broader puzzle of advancing AI safety. And so we established this consortium to bring together this broad range of organizations representing AI creators and users, academic researchers, government and industry folks, and civil society to broadly support this mission of both, developing guidelines like the ones that we released on Friday, but also informing our technical work and our research. So I think one of the things that we're really enthused about is the fact that this consortium essentially represents the largest collection of test and evaluation teams that has been established to date, and the largest convening of these folks in the same place. And so there's a lot of potential to use that group to focus on establishing new foundations and best practices and technical kind of examples of how to do measurement science in AI and how to do AI evaluations. As you alluded to, Courtney, the consortium currently has 5 working groups focused on risk management for generative AI, focused on synthetic content, focused on the form and format evaluations, focused on red teaming specifically, and on broader model safety and security. So we have had a series of discussions in the last month with the consortium about the public drafts that just went out, and about the finalization of that raft of EO deliverables. And we're anticipating that among those 5 working groups, we will soon be launching a series of targeted task force to sort of help us transparently and openly develop practical approaches for putting these things into practice, the ones that were released already, as well as informing future executive order actions and potentially just the broader evaluation work of the Safety Institute. So I think to summarize, we're expecting it, to set up these task forces to help us hit the remaining deadlines and to continue to inform sort of this technical work that's very much still on plate as well.
Got it. Thank you. And so I guess perhaps building on that a little bit, I know that many folks were paying attention to some of the international safety summits or Action Summit, as it's being called now, that France will be hosting. But at the Seoul Summit in particular, we saw 10 safety institutes plus the EU sign this statement of intent focused on international collaboration. And, as you just mentioned, there's a lot of organizations in the US AI Safety Institute consortium. There are also other AI safety institutes that are being stood up that are starting to undertake their work. I know we have an MOU with the UK AI Safety Institute with the US. So, wondering if you can share a little bit more about how the AI Safety Institute is thinking about international collaboration, especially because, for example, many ITI companies are global companies, right? They operate in many different jurisdictions. And so I think, one of the things that would be interesting for us to hear more about is how you all are envisioning this cooperation moving forward in a practical manner, especially because I think, as you noted, there are a lot of areas where there is not yet consensus. Folks are still working, for example, to figure out what red teaming looks like in the AI context. In cybersecurity, it's significantly more clear. In AI, I think it's, somewhat broader, at least right now. And so, I was wondering if there are particular things that you all are thinking about as you're talking with international counterparts, or areas perhaps that you all would be prioritizing in working out what this collaboration actually looks like, particularly because we know that NIST, outside of the AC, has been doing a lot of the kind of international collaboration and international standards and engagement work already. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, it would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very clear to us that we cannot and should not be working on AI safety in individual national silos, because AI is a global technology, and so it requires global solutions. And there's obviously tremendous benefit to standardizing or aligning international approaches to safety. So, I mean, as a result of that, any meaningful work has to be done in concert with other governments' AI safety institutes, and there are other scientific institutions around the world that are working to uphold human rights, safety, and trust in the context of artificial intelligence. And that's why we announced our vision of a global scientific network of safety institutes and related government institutions, basically to enable a variety of partnerships among those members, building on their respective expertise, resources, and talents that each of them bring to the table. And folks, of course, are at very different points of their maturity and in terms of different focuses that they have. So we envision many different potential collaborations among that network. This like AC network, as we have called it, we think will enable kind of a rapid exchange of information among the members and sharing of practical resources, including things like technical resources, that we expect will yield significant efficiencies in research. And research partnership, I think, is a really big part of this, while also helping us to align AI safety policy internationally and serving as a forum for that as well. To catalyze this work, we're intending to convene the National Safety Institutes and other stakeholders later this year to launch this network and to accelerate the advancement of safety science. So, I think really the intent with catalyzing that, with having this convening, is to show how this network can build on the discussions that we had on AI safety in Seoul and in the UK, as well as our existing bilateral collaborations that we've been running with a host of countries. For instance, we signed an MOU with the UK AI Safety Institute, and that's already enabling sort of information sharing and sharing of personnel and expertise, and already helping to facilitate the joint testing of advanced models. And I can provide a lot more examples of the work that we've done with the EU AI office, with Japan, with Kenya, Singapore, and others. But I'll leave it there in the interest of time and just say, there's more to come out of the network, and we'll have more details about this sort of convening later this year soon.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think, we'll be very interested to see how the first convening goes. I think there is, as you noted, a really important role for the US AI Safety Institute to play in kind of bringing these groups together so that we can really make progress jointly with folks that are similarly interested in advancing AI safety around the world. So I think, we'll look forward to hearing more about that soon. Another area that I wanted to touch on, there are certainly quite a lot of efforts, I think, specific to AI safety. We have seen different reports come out from various groups across the board around different practices that might be helpful to mitigating risk. As Jason noted, we just released our AI accountability framework, which has some best practices included therein, focused specifically on frontier AI models. But in going through your kind of strategic vision and the vision document that AC published earlier this year, it's clear that there's kind of both a long-term vision and then kind of a short-term set of priorities. And if you could talk through kind of how you all are working out, how to prioritize, what's most important to focus on in the short term. I know you already mentioned some of the synthetic content work that you'll be kind of course, picking up to meet executive order deadlines. But, beyond that, how you were thinking through, what do we need to focus on advancing in the short term versus what are some of the things we need to be looking at, down the line? I would be interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's certainly our approach that we should be focusing on both near-term and longer-term potential harms from artificial intelligence. So that's one aspect of balancing both, is that there is this need to do both and focus on, to use again the examples from the guidance we put out on Friday, harms like AI being able to generate fake explicit content about real people, which is something that's happening right now. It's not limited to foundation models and is a widespread problem that's been harming people for quite a while, as well as focusing on issues that we might have strong reason to believe are areas of concern, like the tremendous amount of progress that's been happening in biology related to and empowered by AI, and the ways in which that has been extremely beneficial so far, but also raises concerns about the potential for misuse. While the current research indicates that the uplift or the improvement in ability to actually carry out malicious biological activities are relatively nascent. Given that extreme progress, we think that there is a need to be forward-looking in areas like those. So that's an aspect in terms of the risks that we're thinking about, is that we really believe that there is a need to focus on both near-term and longer-term risks, and to use measurement as essentially one of the first tools to come out of the toolbox to understand these risks and to ensure that there is a shared, reasonable, empirically based understanding of when do the longer term or less certain risks become real, and when does action need to be taken to address those risks. And so I think this question is in some ways much easier for an organization focused on science and on measurement than for many others. But I think that that's sort of core to our approach. In terms of the short-term and long-term aspects of kind of how we do business, in a sense, I think right now the Institute is still continuing to scale up to put out its sort of develop its initial relationships with companies, put out its initial sets of guidance, hire the experts that are most important to carrying out this work in a really technically sophisticated way. We've made a lot of progress on those things, but I think over the next months and year, we'll see a lot of additional progress and additional announcements and release of results and resources and things like that that will help to inform our longer term progress beyond that point.
Thank you so much. And so I guess speaking of longer term, I think obviously we're in an election year, and I want to highlight the fact that we had collected kind of questions from stakeholders as they were registering for this event. So, one of the questions that we got several times over is kind of thinking about, there is some understandable uncertainty right now as we're moving into an election year. And there's a lot of AI activity going on across agencies as a result of the AI executive order. And right now, I think Jason mentioned earlier, ITI is urging Congress to permanently kind of erect the AI Safety Institute and statute. And we're hopeful we'll see some movement on that legislation this week. But I think, kind of talking about long-term goals and fostering consistency across administrations, it would be helpful to know, how is NIST and AC thinking about setting itself up for, kind of future success, given, there is a bit of uncertainty in the current environment? And, is there anything that industry can be doing to help solidify this work, knowing how important it is that the US kind of continues to have a leadership role in some of these AI safety conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned one form of uncertainty, but of course, it's not just about political uncertainty. We have so much uncertainty from just how rapidly the technology is developing and the industry is evolving. So I think we are operating very much in a mode of agility and being ready to change and evolve as priorities change. But I do think, going back to sort of the core vision of the AI Safety Institute, which is creating safe AI and doing that with the knowledge of the fact that safety is what drives adoption and safety drive further innovation, we really see this core mission as enduring, as fundamentally enduring. We're seeing, again, so much progress on AI so quickly, and the US government needs the capacity to keep up and to ensure that we know how to evaluate and understand this progress, how to make sense of it, and how to inform discourse and decision-making in both policy and industry. So I think it's clear that in any future administration, or even just, from one year to the next, folks are going to want to understand what is going on with AI and what risks it poses and what opportunities it presents. So our focus really on the scientific aspect and on the science of AI safety and evaluation. And as we build out what we hope will be sort of unique capacities, unique government capacities, and a world-class technical team, and testing relationships with key stakeholders in industry and with government and civil society. I think we're pretty confident that the work we're doing to advance the science of AI safety and evaluation will endure.
Thanks. That's helpful. I think, folks are just rightfully, wondering about how the future will look and what that all means for some of the important work that you all have been doing at the AI Safety Institute. So appreciate that you guys are thinking about this kind of through that longer term lens. I think we only have 1 or 2 minutes left, so maybe I'll ask one final question and then we'll wrap it up. But one of the things that you mentioned specific to the managing misuse risks document is around kind of some of the best practices that are captured in there. I also recall in the executive order there was some discussion about guidelines specific to AI red teaming. I mentioned that a couple minutes ago as well. And so I'm curious, as I was going through the managing misuse risks document, there is some high-level guidance perhaps on the way in which companies should be thinking about leveraging red teaming. But I think, one of the areas, at least when I've had discussions with different companies, is that, it's not 100% clear between companies what red teaming looks like. And so I think, there was some hope that perhaps in the future there would perhaps be more concrete guidance or something more specific. So wondering if you can talk through whether that's something that you all are maybe intending to incorporate into this, or if there is something else that might come out down the line specific to AI red teaming. But I know it's an area that is of interest to a lot of folks, so wanted to hit on that as a final question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very difficult to address this question without acknowledging the fundamental lack of consensus about what AI red teaming means. And certainly that's a role that NIST has played in the past, is to help identify some shared understanding, or at least an option for a shared understanding of a taxonomy of terms. But I do think another thing that's really important to note in the context of this guidance that went on Friday is, it is something that is intended to be very domain agnostic and procedural in nature, outlining kind of the life cycle of a foundation model and how you might go about thinking about misuse risk. And it does talk about red teaming. But in terms of technical specificity and really getting down to the nuts and bolts of how you go about testing a system and red teaming a system for its ability to enable misuse, a lot of this does come down to what capability you're assessing. And for one thing, we have this document is out for public comment, and we very much welcome input on ways in which we can better refine and provide more detail and depth that is hopefully widely applicable and applicable across domains. But I think there's also a strong chance that we'll be working additionally to provide more specific information and best practices and technical resources for domain-specific considerations, so that folks have a better sense of how might you go about testing specifically for biosecurity risk or specifically for cybersecurity risk or things along those lines.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Helpful to know kind of both how you're thinking about it in the context of that document, but then also down the line. So with that, I want to make sure we have time to have a conversation with some of our member companies who did some work on the AI accountability framework. Conrad, thank you so much again for your time. We really appreciate you being here with us today, sharing a little bit more about what the AI Safety Institute is doing, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with you all moving forward. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, John Miller, who is our Senior Vice President of Policy for Trust Data and Technology. He is going to moderate a conversation with several of our member companies who are engaged in the development of our AI accountability framework. So John, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. And I will certainly invite our esteemed panelists to turn on their cameras. We are really excited. And also, I should say, Courtney, a great conversation with Conrad. We're really excited to have 3 of our member companies here with us today who were engaged in the development of our accountability framework. As others have mentioned, the framework lays out a consensus set of tech industry practices for the responsible development and deployment of AI systems, and proposes a way to really think about the allocation of responsibility across the AI value chain. So we'll see how much of that we can get into in the next 23 minutes. We are here I'll just briefly introduce our panelists and then invite them to say a little bit more about themselves as we go forward here. We've got Will Carter, Responsible AI Lead for Accenture Federal Services, Daniela Combe, Vice President of Emerging Tech Advocacy at IBM, and Shannon Orr, Assistant General Counsel for AI at Intuit. So to start off, I do want to just ask each of you to share a bit more about your role at the company, where your company sits in the AI value chain, and really just at a high level, how you and your companies are thinking about AI responsibility and trust. So why don't I just go in alphabetical order? I'll start with Will.
Thanks so much, John, and thank you to ITI also for hosting this event and for pulling together this really important discussion. I am the Responsible AI Lead for Accenture Federal Services, which is actually a new role for me. So I'll be leading our engagement with federal agencies on the responsible and safe development and deployment of AI kind of across the board and across the stack. Accenture is a company that does so many different things. And so this was one of the more daunting questions that you gave me, John. But I think the really key thing for us is we do work across the stack, all the way from the bottom to the top of the stack. And not only that, we really play all of the roles across the AI value chain. So we're developing our own AI solutions. We're working with third parties to integrate AI into their own systems and operations. And we're also deploying AI both in our own operations and also for customers. And so really, we see that value chain end to end, and we see the opportunities and the challenges presented by AI throughout that entire life cycle and across the experience. So it's a really interesting place to be working on this stuff, particularly with federal agencies who, in addition to their policy mission and the great work that Conrad and others are doing, also, are experiencing AI in a really unique way.
Great, thanks. And we'll definitely come back to some of that. But first, let me go to you, Daniela, if you want to say a little bit about, again, your role and IBM's thinking on all of this.
Sure. Thank you, John. And at first, I want to thank ITI for bringing together so many voices across the technology industry to develop the AI accountability framework. It definitely takes a lot of diverse voices on these topics and lots of points of view to end up with a better result for all of us. So I am a VP of Emerging Tech Advocacy, and sort of similar to Will, this is a fairly new role. But I'm part of IBM's Office of Privacy and Responsible Technology. And our role is to develop, implement, promote open, transparent privacy, technology ethics, and related compliance practices throughout IBM's business and also externally. And look, IBM is sort of similar to Accenture in some ways, right? In terms of being playing all the various roles. But we are a business-to-business company. Our customers are financial institutions, government, healthcare organizations, et cetera. And I think, we've been around for over 110 years. And I think one of the reasons for our longevity is trust. We're a trusted partner. We put technology out into the world in a trusted way. And, in fact, our CEO, Arvind Krishna, often says, trust is our license to operate. And so in the context of being a developer of AI models and solutions, working with a large ecosystem of partners that are using and embedding our AI capabilities into their solutions, and also working with clients to help them deploy AI, and of course, deploying it ourselves, it's an absolute must that we be guided by a set of trust and transparency principles and policies, and also an operating model and a governance structure around that to make sure that everything we're doing is actually things that we want to be putting out into the world and that appropriately considers the risks. And I think we'll be getting back to some of that in the rest of our discussion.
Yeah, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Shannon, I'll let you chime in on this.
Hi, good morning. And thank you so much for including us. This is such an exciting topic, and it's been so great to work with ITI on all aspects of this framework. So would love to second all of the comments that were made. I am Assistant General Counsel for AI at Intuit, and I help run our Responsible AI program. It is deeply rooted in customer trust, and it is something that we feel very, very passionately about at Intuit. Just to second what the other panelists have said, trust is not only important to the world, but it makes really sound business. It's a really sound thing to do for business as well. Without customer trust, they won't use any of our products and services. And so it starts here with AI and the work that we do. And specifically at Intuit, I help provide formal guidance to all of our teams on the use of AI, as well as our development of AI and when we act as a deployer. We also help operationalize our AI program through testing and monitoring and making sure that we are embedding all aspects of our AI principles into all of our products and services.
Thanks so much, and really thanks to all three of you for the kind words. I think you raise an important point, really, which is that we really do try to bring in a diversity of opinions and feedback and perspectives across the tech sector, and I would agree with you. I think it makes our accountability framework that much stronger, because I don't think that's been really pulled together in this way previously. So Daniela, let me go back to you. I think you and I think everyone mentioned trust and how important that is, right? And trust is certainly a pillar of what we do on AI, and really a lot of our work. It's even in my title, so I know that well. Something else that we talk about quite a bit, though, is also risk management, right? And taking a risk-based approach. And we certainly think that is important to AI regulation. And the concept really underlies our accountability framework. Can you describe how IBM embraces a risk-based approach to AI? Maybe connecting it to some of the more longer established practices that you mentioned on data, privacy, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, look, I think it is absolutely the right thing to do to take a risk-based approach to these tools. AI is a tool. And you think about a chat bot that's used to recommend a restaurant. It's quite a bit different than an AI tool that's used in the healthcare sector or to extend credit or not credit or housing or something that really impacts people's lives. And so you really have to take a risk-based approach to these things. And it's something that we think about internally, but of course we advocate for externally as well. And so internally, you asked, about kind of how we've established our processes. We have an integrated governance process that really started and became integrated because it started with privacy, right? With GDPR, where we really needed to make sure in a company with 250,000 plus employees and operating in 175 countries around the world, right? That you had a foundational way to make sure that we were complying with the privacy laws. It started with GDPR, but of course it didn't end there because there's so many different laws. And then we extended that as, we did this well before the ChatGPT craze kind of hit, right? And everybody started talking about AI and generative AI. We really established a set of processes building off of our model on privacy to extend that to the way we looked at data and data clearance more generally that's used to train our models, to do model clearance, to look at when there is a higher risk, right, that it goes through it, sometimes even an ethics review. We are one of the first companies that established an AI ethics board. That's, again, a diverse set of voices that's saying, look, do we really want to do certain things? Are they consistent with our principles of trust and transparency? And then we make sure that that's an integrated process from the time you're starting with a product or service that you might want to deliver to a customer, all the way through its life cycle. Now, we also recognize that we did this before people started talking about AI regulation. And of course, you have to have this in place, and because the AIR regulations we knew were coming, at least in some places. You know, we needed to make sure you could also prove that you were doing it, right? So it's a platform that shows along the way, that keeps track of everything you are doing throughout the life cycle. And I think what's really powerful, we kind of view ourselves, we're customer number one, right? What we are building for the external world on what we call WatsonX.governance, we are actually implementing internally and vice versa. So we are adding our knowledge to the WatsonX capabilities that we're putting out there into the market. So I think it's really a powerful story of kind of learning. And look, we're early on in this whole AI evolution in a lot of ways. It's moving fast, but we're still early. And you know, you have to have a resilient platform and a resilient way of doing this, because things will change over time. And so I think that is what we're building out internally and offering also into the marketplace. So hopefully that helps a bit.
No, thanks for that. Yeah, you know, and you know, pivoting to some other aspects of the accountability framework, and if that hasn't been dropped in the chat as a resource, maybe it could be, but if not, we can get it to you some other way. You know, Will, I wanted to go back to something you said in your opening remarks as well. You know, I think you kind of articulated what, at least in our experience in drafting the framework, is true for a lot of ITI member companies, that, you know, you're not only, you know, it's not a binary, hey, we've got developers over here and we've got deployers over there and that's it, right? You know, we've also got, you got companies that are wearing multiple hats, deployer and developer at different times. But then we also introduce a concept of integrator. Can you talk a little bit about why that is important, you know, to Accenture, or even more broadly from a practical standpoint?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this is really critical, and it gets to a broader conversation that we've been having for the last few years about how we make sure that these frameworks are both really fit to purpose and also acknowledge and reflect all of the complexity of different business models in the AI ecosystem. Like, at the end of the day, developer deployer has its uses, but it really glosses over a lot of variation in the relationships between different entities that work together to make a AI application actually reach the end user and actually you know, deliver impact in the real world. And you know, at Accenture, we were one of the early adopters of AI principles. We developed our own internal governance processes, and you know, developed our own responsible AI solutions for our internal deployments of AI. And we learned a lot from that experience. But actually, one of the really important things that we've done since then is try to take those lessons and bring them to our customers. Because at the end of the day, one of the challenges of responsible AI in the AI ecosystem today is there's a shortage of talent, there's a shortage of compute, there's a shortage of data to do this kind of work. Every company that sees the potential of AI for their business is not going to be able to do this from scratch on their own. And that's where integrators can play a really valuable role in helping bring capabilities to companies, but also helping them to understand those risks and challenges that come with those capabilities, understand how they're going to play out within the context of their particular technical environment, their business, their user base, and then help them to actually implement effective controls to manage that risk. And that's something that has become a really important part of our business in the way that we think about responsible AI. We recently appointed a chief responsible AI officer, Arnab Chakraborty, in order to really build out this business, because it's one of the things that we've seen most in demand from our clients, and also one of the areas that we think we can add the most value and really differentiate ourselves in the market. We can go to clients and say, we've dealt with these risks before, whether it's bias, safety, cybersecurity, privacy, and data protection. And we're going to help you to manage that within the context of your business as well. We've developed a variety of offerings, including a responsible AI platform that really is modular and allows companies to figure out, how do I actually want to interact with this? What are the ways that I actually want to approach the management of risk? And we're doing this to try to create that leverage. We have a lot of talent. We have the resources and the experience in this area to manage that risk and to build that trust that really facilitates the deployment and adoption of AI. And so we want to bring that to the wide range of companies, because the fact is the vast majority of the AI ecosystem in a few years, I mean, even now, but especially in a few years, is going to be financial companies, retail companies, healthcare companies, that their core expertise is not technology, is not artificial intelligence. They're never going to be able to build that muscle to do everything for themselves. And so an integrator can come in, bridge the gap between them and their vendors, help them to understand the technology they're using within the context of their own particular business and operations, and help them to manage that risk throughout the value cycle. So I think that's really where we see the importance of the integrator role. And also, it's important that we lay out some common expectations about what is expected of those folks from a risk management and responsible AI perspective. And so that's where frameworks like this that break out that category and provide that real clarity and kind of common understanding of the role are really important.
Thanks, appreciate that. And I see we're already coming up on time, but I will, because we had such a spirited discussion of this topic during the prep, I will invite, if Shannon or Daniela want to weigh in on integrator, please do so in 45 seconds or less. That would be great, so we can get to a couple other things quickly. Thanks.
That was such an excellent overview. So thank you. That was amazing. The one thing I would just also note is, particularly in the context of generative AI, which is so much a part of the discussion right now, and it's all in the media, taking these very, very large models and actually making them applicable to an actual customer need is very challenging. And it takes a lot of different players tweaking these technologies, working together on various types of research, working together on various types of testing. And it's not just one player that is able to kind of go through the whole chain in order to actually result in something that is valuable to an end user. And because of that, this concept is really, really important, because it actually helps companies think through, hey, I do need to rely on you, and I do need to rely on the developer in certain instances for their underlying model, but also I have my own responsibilities when I tweak this, or if I add data to it. And I may have my own capabilities that I need to build in order to make sure it's responsible. And sometimes that's in partnership with the underlying developer. Sometimes that's just us on our own. And then there's additional things for when you actually deploy that into the application. And I think with a lot of laws that we're seeing right now, they're following this framework that comes from privacy law, which is great. But I think it's actually missing this critical component that has been articulated in this framework for providing the words and also roles and responsibilities for triaging critical issues throughout the entire value chain.
That was so well said, Shannon. I totally agree with that. With two things I would just add to. One is, we totally believe in these open ecosystems, right? It really is important to have a lot of players at the table who are adding their capabilities to, throughout this whole value chain. So it is something that is a big part of what we have been promoting out there and advocating for, right, is openness. That's starting from the models, but also allowing people to build on them, so that all can play. But I also do want to add one more thing, which is, and you're absolutely right. There's sort of this developer deployer dichotomy, and there are a lot of other kind of gray zone of players. I really just think that what's the most important thing is to think about the appropriate level of accountability for the role the parties play. Who's making the decisions on what the use case is going to be? Who is in the best position to do whatever level of testing, to make certain decisions? And I think it's a much more nuanced approach than just a dichotomy, as you note, and definitely adds to the complexity of our already interesting and complicated space.
Well, thanks. I do want to, we've got 7 different practices outlined in the ITI accountability framework. We're not going to be able to just have a robust discussion of all 7 of them here in the time we have left. But, 2 of them, actually, of the 7 deal with transparency, which I think underlines the importance of that concept in particular. Shannon, if you could spend maybe a couple of minutes just, speaking to why transparency is a critical component of accountability. And I think, and you might even be able to squeeze in a little bit of something on testing in that response because it relates to it. And then we'll have covered 3. That would be great. Thank you.
We started this conversation out by talking about trust. And for me, and I think for Intuit as well, trust is a conversation. And it is an ongoing conversation, and it's an ongoing relationship that we have with our customers that we are responsible for every single day and with every new product that we put out into the market. And making sure that we develop trust is there. Without transparency, I don't think there's actually any way to do that. Part of that is because fundamentally developing trust with our customers means that they understand what choices are available to them and that they have the information to assess whether or not the product is actually helping them. And in many ways, especially with this new technology, sometimes our customers are the only people who can tell if something is working correctly. And so being transparent and having that conversation with them is critical. At Intuit, we have a principle on transparency. So it's fundamentally something that we have committed to in every single one of our every single way that we interact with our customers with AI. We always strive for the right level of transparency and explainability in our AI. And we focus particularly on providing customer-facing explanations so that they can understand the outcomes, they can have confidence in the results, and they can also help triage and help us know if something isn't quite right. And that, in order to do this well, we also have to make sure that we are testing things thoroughly. And so that also helps us understand what type of transparency to provide to our customers. So it could be as simple as, hey, by the way, you're interacting with a chatbot. This chatbot has AI capabilities. It may sound like a human, but it may not get things right. That's one form of transparency. We may also do something a little bit more formal, providing exact understanding of why a determination or recommendation was made so that our customers can make choices about whether or not that was right. In certain instances, we may have an actual regulatory requirement to provide some form of explainability. In those instances, we actually work to make sure that AI systems themselves are tested and are designed to meet that standard of accountability. So that's many ways that we kind of work through that here at Intuit, and it's an evolving standard. And we're very thankful for frameworks like this that help us think through that approach.
Well, thanks so much, Shannon. Well, we're almost out of time. Daniela or Will, if you have any parting thoughts or you want to add to that in 30 seconds or less, please do.
Yeah, I will add, yes, with transparency, it starts with the data. Be transparent about your sources. Don't hide your AI, in anything you're doing. And, when we put out and we build models and we put out papers that talk both about the data sets that we use to train our models, the testing we apply, and we think that that's the best practice. And if you're not willing to do that, you probably shouldn't be in this space.
Thanks.
I wholeheartedly agree. And, one of the big things I would add, it all comes back to trust. You can be the most responsible actor in the world. You can take such careful steps to very carefully manage risk in an AI system. And if you don't tell anyone what you did, and if they don't know, and if you don't provide validation, you don't provide data that validates your claims about the way that you've managed risk and been responsible, people won't trust it any more than if you hadn't done all of that work. So I think it's not only really important for us to, manage risk effectively, to earn that trust, but then we also have to share that information, not just with users, but also with all of our suppliers, all of our consumers throughout the value chain, and with the deployers downstream that are going to be interacting with these systems. The biggest thing that we get asked on the Accenture side by many of our clients is, I want to know what this thing is before I deploy it in my business. I want to know that risk was managed effectively. It's not just about protecting my users, it's about protecting me as a business. And I think that really gets to the heart of transparency and trust for everyone in the AI ecosystem.
Well, thank you so much, Will. We're going to that will be the final word. We're going to have to leave it there. Leave it there. We're at time. Really appreciate all 3 of your insights. Hopefully this will prompt folks to actually dive into the accountability framework. We talked a lot here about trust as the kind of underlying guiding principle, but the practices that are in there really are helpful for building and establishing that trust. And as we also heard, we really try to inject some nuance to reflect the complexity of the value chain and all the actors that are not necessarily fitting into one box or the other. So thanks on behalf of ITI and Jason and Courtney. We need to wrap it. Thank you.